And welcome to the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with my usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
How's it going, everyone?
We're coming at you a day later than we usually do, and I can tell you it feels as weird to us as it probably does to you to listen to this on a Wednesday. So bear with us, and we will all get through this together. But, Russ, nonetheless, we will go through our usual agenda. We'll cover some news and notes at the top of the show. Luckily, as you and I were talking offline, not that many injuries, if any, that we have to dive into, which is good. And then, with the fantasy playoffs upon us for several folks, we're going to dive into some NFL schedules where we look at some fantasy players that are facing some tougher defenses down the stretch, and then some players that are facing, I don't know, whatever politically correct term you want to use for a cupcake defense down the road. So, and then finally, you and I, Russ, will get into the usual DraftKings value plays for next week, week 14. So without further ado, let's just jump right in, Russ. Again, like you and I had mentioned, kind of good that we're not talking about some catastrophic injury this week.
This is a much different week than normal, or at least what we're used to this year, because I can't think of an injury that was extremely significant yesterday. There were a few here and there, but it seemed like all the regular players that we're starting, nothing really bad happened. So
yeah, I mean, believe me, I was scrolling through Roto World, the blurbs, to see who we would talk about, and this is what I came up with. So it may not be nearly as exciting as previous weeks, but it still is relevant. So first up, Russ, let's cover the mess that is the Philadelphia backfield, at least from a fantasy perspective. I mean, obviously they had the upset on Sunday against New England, which I don't know anyone that saw that coming, but nonetheless, I think the more fantasy relevant news is DeMarco Murray seemingly out of favor with Coach Chip Kelly now. Even Chip Kelly going so far as to say the running back competition is week to week between him and Ryan Matthews, now that Ryan Matthews is back, to which DeMarco Murray promptly went up the food chain to the owner to complain about Chip Kelly. So it's one big dramatic mess, Russ. I couldn't even imagine for Philadelphia fans, nor do I want to. But this is a fantasy podcast for us, so let's talk about the fantasy relevance. You know, DeMarco Murray was sort of a fringy running back one, I'd say, this year by default. Not necessarily him replicating his year from last year. It just there wasn't a lot of other players getting the attention and touches that he was. But that's definitely dropped off lately. I don't know, man. What do you make of that whole situation? Is it just too toxic for you to even touch? Is there a silver lining there? What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, I think in these types of situations, sometimes the things that are going on outside are fantasy relevant. So like today, it came out that Murray had like a little mini meeting with the owner.
He was essentially telling on the teacher to the principal.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. So I don't know if this is a squeaky wheel gets the grease type of game for him. You know, like Chip Kelly doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to listen to his owner. He's probably going to do things the way he wants. But I think there's a little narrative street here where I wouldn't be shocked if Murray sort of gets the carries we thought he was going to get when he got that huge contract that he signed. So
yeah, well, and you know, I think we all sort of knew that wasn't happening when he signed that contract, but I think at the very least we still thought he'd be a running back one, and really, I mean, this year has really tailed off for him. I mean, in the last 3 weeks, he had 8 carries for 24 yards against New England, 14 for 30 yards the week before in Detroit, and then 13 for 64 against Tampa. So, you know, on the season, Russ, you've got 163 carries, 569 yards, a measly 3.5 yards a carry.
I don't think,
like last season.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone would contend the idea that Darren Sproles was the best running back for the Eagles on Sunday. So there's kind of that awkward narrative as well where Ryan Matthews and Sproles are playing well when they're in there. So it's a messy situation. It's kind of been that way all year. he turned it on in the middle of the year, but it's back to early season. So
let's look at rest of the season, Russ. Who, if you had to pick one, gun to your head, who are you going to roll with from a fantasy perspective, Murray or Matthews? Now that Matthews is back from injury,
Murray. I'm still going with Murray. I
really?
think. Yeah.
Interesting.
I just have a feeling that he's going to be getting forced touches now, at least. At least for the next game.
And he might be in what I like to call Tom Brady pissed off mode. Possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. To me, I would probably roll with Matthews the rest of the way. Before the injury, in the game he got injured against Miami, 8 carries for 18 yards, but he did have a touchdown. But the week before at Dallas, 11 carries, 67 yards, and a touchdown. The week before that, 6 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. So on the season, Russ, he's got 75 carries for 427 yards. So not that far off from Murray, with a very nice 5.7 yards a touch or a rush. So I don't know, man. I think it's a perfect storm of things this upcoming week. You got Matthews coming back. You got Murray, who it remains to be seen if he stays in the doghouse or, as you said,
right,
the owner sort of nudges him along.
It's going to go one way or the other. Like, he's going to get feature carries, or
he's going to get
he might get a really limited role. So It's going to be, I'm watching from the sidelines, and hey, look at it this way. If you drafted him, you're probably not in the playoffs, so you don't have to worry about it.
That's what we're all about here, Russ. The silver lining. I like it. Maybe we'll rename that the podcast to that. The Silver Lining with Michael Moore.
Oh my God.
That's not bad, actually.
That could be a good, if we're looking for an in-studio show.
Yeah, I'm saying
have like an Oprah setup, and
that's not bad. Because look, that's essentially every fantasy player's week. So, all right. So we've covered one missing situation in Philadelphia, Russ. Let's jump right into another in Cleveland. Today it was said that Johnny Manziel will be renamed the starter after he was benched for yet another off-field transgression. And, like you said just a minute ago with Philadelphia, where off-season stuff kind of meanders its way into fantasy relevance, I don't think there's any doubt that's the case here. You had Coach Mike Pettine bench Johnny Manziel for his partying ways. Only for him to be overruled by somebody above Mike Pettine to start Johnny Manziel. So right off the bat, Russ, you've got a quarterback and a coach at odds. For the season, for Manziel, we'll look at the good and the bad, okay? And then you can tell me what you think. So the bad, 59.4 completion percentage, only 155 passing yards a game. Not good. The good, 7.3 yards an attempt. So even though they're not passing a lot, he is gaining some yards through the air. 5 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Now, that doesn't count fumbles. But I don't know, man. It's one of those deals where, again, as you said, if you have anyone on Cleveland at this point, save for my man crush Gary Barnidge, you're probably not playing in the playoffs. But if you are, what's your take the rest of the season on Manziel and just the Browns in general there?
It's just such a mess. And the Browns team in general and organization is one of the reasons why I hate judging results of sort of draft prospects, because for Johnny Manziel, there was a range of outcomes for him. And going to that team, you're set up for failure. So I'm not a fan of him going forward, and hopefully he can get to a new team at some point soon, but this isn't looking good for him. Guys, it's looking like our friend Michael has frozen, so I guess I'm just going to keep going with our little agenda here. I wanted to talk about the Seahawks. Russell Wilson has been incredible lately. He's been over 28 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games in 4-point per passing touchdown leagues. 11 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown in the last 3 games. And he's just been dominant. Even with Jimmy Graham going down last week, we still saw that ceiling. And it looks like the Seahawks are priming at the perfect time of year. So, I mean, I'm buying him as a higher end quarterback 1 going forward. I mean, the trade deadline's passed, so you're probably not going to get him. But if you own him right now, I don't see – he's pretty much matchup proof as well. So I don't see how you're going to sit him for anyone, really anyone now, especially with Brady without Gronkowski. So he's a top 3 to 5 quarterback for me going forward. And then you look at the counterparts here. Doug Baldwin over the last 5 weeks has averaged 25.8 PPR points per game. In the last 5 weeks, as I mentioned, and he's wide receiver 5 in those weeks. So, I mean, he's been incredible. I wasn't high on Doug Baldwin coming out, obviously. I mean, he was an undrafted free agent, but he's slowly grown into a role here. And, I mean, he's going to be a free agent coming up, but this is interesting. He's developed into a wide receiver 1 on that team. And going forward, I mean, he's a wide receiver 2. I don't see how you could deny it anymore. He's pretty much he's wide receiver 12 on the season, and it's not just the last 2 weeks. He's been pretty consistent this year, even with Russell Wilson not being consistent. So, and then Thomas Rawls, 200-yard games in the last 3 weeks and 4 touchdowns. He's the running back 1 in weeks 11 through 13, and he's played well. He's not just a sub-in who went into a good system. He's playing well. So you really like to see that, and he's a running back 1 going forward. So I really like him as well. Where are we at, Michael? Oh, man. All right. Well, I guess we're just going to keep going here as my co-pilot is a black screen right now, but we're just going to keep trudging through. So one of the things me and Mike wanted to do today was go through the playoffs and talk about some of the best players that are playing and most likely are in the playoff hunt for you if you're there he is. Our pal's back.
Don't ask. I hate everything. It's okay.
It was my black screen co-pilot.
No, you did quite good. I don't know what you said, but I'm sure it was insightful and it all worked out.
We went through the Seahawks, and I was sort of introducing the next segment with our playoff sort of schedule.
Got it. Okay, back on track. All right. So who did you get to first, Russ?
I didn't. I was purely introducing it to our
very
listeners.
Good. So as you probably mentioned, I have no doubt. So we looked at the remaining schedules for typically the next 3 weeks, just because that typically is the most common playoff formats for a lot of people. So we'll go through some players, Russ, that are playing some pretty favorable schedules and some players that are going through some unfavorable schedules. And we'll sort of look at each one on a case-by-case. It's not like, hey, we're saying to start these or not start these guys. I mean, a lot of them are studs. But all right, so let's go into the first position, Russ, quarterback. Let's go with a quarterback who seemingly has a fairly tough schedule the rest of the way. Tom Brady. The New England Patriots are playing the Texans, the 3rd-ranked pass defense next. The Titans, the 9th-ranked pass defense, and then the Jets, only the 18th-ranked pass defense. So a couple of good defenses, Russ, but between that and I'm sure we can touch on the major receiver issues that Tom Brady's having. I don't know, man. I think you sort of touched on it last week. Tom Brady is not, I think, as much of a slam dunk candidate the rest of the way as he was this season, right?
Right. And I mentioned that talking about Russell Wilson. Brady without Gronk is a new ball game. I mean, he could lose.
You know what? I will readily admit, Russ, let me just interrupt you. I will readily admit I did not – you were right. I was wrong. It's not – if Gronk isn't there, it is horrible, man. It's not good.
It's just – you kind of just got to put your hands up. If he still had Edelman, I think he would be able to salvage this more, but losing both of them is just a crusher. I mean, they're throwing out Keyshawn Martin for legitimate snaps, and he's basically off the street. So he's still a quarterback one because he's Tom Brady, and like you saw last game, I mean, it was the Eagles, but even if they're losing, he can drive the